Welcome, welcome. People on the teams hear me. No news is good news. Okay, thank you. Welcome everybody to the first of the year Northern New England Tug. This is our second overall. We did one in September and plan to be doing these quarterly going forward. And thank you to the Rue Institute for hosting us a second time on this much colder day. September was so nice. Thank you for coming out, those who did, and joining us online for those who can't. Just do a quick recap of the Rue Institute here in Portland, downtown on the Bay. The mission of the Rue Institute is to create a rigorous and sustainable research and education program to drive innovation, talent development, and economics opportunity for the state of Maine and the surrounding region. The Rue Institute is named in recognition of the generous founding investment made by Barbara and David Rue. The Rue understand the challenges posed by society by rapid technological change and why a new model of higher education is the best way to meet emerging industry needs. Rue, of course, is through Northeastern. It's an extension of Northeastern University in Boston, and was a founding academic partner because they believe in the power of its distinctive model, which makes employers vital partners in learning and research. I look forward to joining the faculty here in March, teaching analytics. We have bathrooms for those in person halfway down the hall on the right, if you go that way. And if you haven't already, be sure to check in either online or at the front desk if you're virtual online. That gives us credit for our next time with Tableau to get swag and reimbursements for the food we have and stuff. I just wanted to ask how many people in the audience, I won't ask online, use Tableau regularly? Everyone? Passionate Tableauers? And then call out the fact that we have about 25 different companies represented in attendance, at least according to the RSVP list. I always think this is interesting who's amongst us on this call to show what kind of community we're building, including, of course, the Rue, WEX, Unum, IDEX, all big players here in Portland. There's folks from a smaller consulting company called Architecture down in Boston. Up Education is represented, Alteryx. Made in RA USA, Maine Health, MIT, Avia Health, Intermed, which is here in Maine, Berkeley University, Stevens College is represented, Rain City Dogs, NMDC, Hinfornet, Tech Target, and also someone who used their Yahoo email address to sign up, which means you should update your email. We'll just go through the agenda quickly. So we've already had our networking and breakfast. Hopefully everyone got to grab a bite here or at home. Then we have our first presenter, Olivia Hoover, who's a good friend of mine from Comcast. She's going to be presenting for the first section, and then we'll have a quick break for bathrooms and more food before local Rue teacher and researcher Michael Correll will present on bar graphs for the second section, and then we'll just have a quick wrap up at the end. Each section, feel free to have Q&A at the end. If you're a presenter, try to leave a little bit of time for that. We had a lot of questions last time. I'll be around with the mic in the live audience so everybody online can hear what the question is. And with that, I'll turn it over to Olivia, who's going to take over the screen.
Good morning. Thanks, Patrick. Just confirming you all can hear me okay?
We got you.
Awesome. Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Olivia Hoover. As Patrick just said, I work for Comcast. I have been part of the Tableau community for about 5 years now, and I'm so excited to be with you today. Let me share my screen. All right, just confirming you can see that.
Here in the, yes, we got it.
Okay, thanks. All right, so what I want to talk about today is professional goal setting for 2024. As we start the new year, it's good to refocus our efforts on some very intentional goals. And I have a few suggestions for us today, insofar that I would suggest goal setting. One of your goals maybe be around practicing your skills, networking with people in your field, or creating a portfolio to help your career. So I'll go into each one of these now. Practicing your analytical skills is just like practicing any other skill in fitness or in life. The more you use it, the better you will be at it. So in practicing your Tableau or analytics skills, you could try new techniques or programs. A lot of times I find myself wanting to do something and knowing a concept in my brain, Googling for some Tableau community help, and finding some really amazing blog posts out there with suggestions that I could incorporate into my dashboard. So definitely take advantage of some blog posts to try some new techniques. Programs that you could start using. If you've not tried Tableau Prep can be a really powerful tool. One of the programs that I am trying to get better at myself is actually not on the Tableau front, but in the SQL Server front. I'm trying to get better at querying because a better query will help me have a better dashboard. So you can approach this from multiple angles. Personal and work projects. So if you want to practice your skills, you could always revamp some existing dashboards that you have. It's always good to take a second look at it. Maybe something's out of date or perhaps could use a refreshed look. This is going to be a big one for me this year as well as passion projects. So I remember, especially during the pandemic, there were a lot of analysts that took it upon themselves to make dashboards following the health data that was coming out around the pandemic. And it can be a really powerful tool, not only for yourself, but for others when you have something that can be impactful on a global scale. Lastly, I just wanted to mention that there are online challenges that you can participate in. One of them being Makeover Monday. Makeover Monday is my personal favorite because I have been the host of an internal Makeover Monday series internally to Comcast for about 4 years. And I cannot take credit for that because that initiative was actually started by Patrick when we were coworkers. And I have continued that reign since then. Can't believe it's been 4 years, but it's been so much fun to do a Makeover Monday. And I'll explain more about that in a second. But another big one that I definitely think is worth mentioning is Workout Wednesday. So every Wednesday, you can come out with a new skill that they're trying to encourage, and they give you the resources to do so. So it's very similar to Makeover Monday. So I just mentioned that internally I'm hosting the Makeover Monday, and I actually wanted to demonstrate what we do to encourage you to either participate in your own or even start your own. So I will take you over to Tableau. So if this were a meeting in my internal Makeover Monday series, here's how it would go. I would ask for submissions and we would bring one up, as I've now done, in full screen. And we would have the person who submitted it review their intention for the dashboard. Maybe they were trying something new. And then we would ask for feedback. So I would love to do that right now. I'm going to present this dashboard to you as if you are my audience. And in the Teams chat, I have it open on my phone. So if you could just give me some feedback when I ask for it. So hi, my name is Olivia. I created this dashboard, and I did. This is mine. This dashboard, I wanted to rank airline flights and how they looked over time. So you can see here on the left-hand side that you can change the month, and that changes the graph over here on the right-hand side to show which airline ranks higher than the other one. And this data here on the right-hand side is exactly what's represented here on the left. I've broken these out into 2 buckets, like large airlines versus small airlines. And on the bottom here, the ranks will also change. So that's the top half of my dashboard. And on the bottom, I also wanted to give the raw data about passengership before and after, I think it's March 2020 when things started to take a dive. So here's the raw numbers in total passenger count, but I also did a sheet selection where you can select a month-over-month difference or a percentage difference month over month. So that's my dashboard, and I would love any feedback that you have about how I could have improved this or what you really like about what I've done here. Patrick, if there's anyone in the room, feel free to give them the mic, or if you're in the Teams chat, I'd love to hear your feedback.
Absolutely. The chat might be a little faster on their feet, but if anyone in the room has something, here we go. Is this 2020 data?
This is 2020 data, yes.
Yes, the March looks awful, yeah.
Yes.
Hello, awesome job. The only feedback I had was maybe making the colors more meaningful, maybe, or like having like the colors correspond to like the brand colors or something like that. That's the only thing I could see. This is great work though. I like the buttons and being able to switch between the different metrics. Good job.
Awesome. Thanks for the feedback, and totally agreed about the colors. I like that idea of pinning them to the colors of the airline brands. That would be an awesome update to this dashboard.
We have a thing in the chat that says, can you explain why you used red and green in the raw numbers at the bottom? I was going to ask about that too.
Yes. In the bottom, I used red and green to show the highest and the lowest. And I think it's just relative to month over month, or perhaps like the largest in the entire, I don't think it's the entire dashboard, because here we have the darkest green. Oh, and that is the darkest. Oh, but this one is very close in the number, but it's not this dark green. So I think it's just the very lowest and the very highest of the whole chart, actually. And if I'm totally honest, I made this dashboard years ago, and this is one of the colors on the bottom half of the chart are one of the biggest things that I would change if I would update this. I think it's kind of an eye chart having this red and green screaming at you at the bottom, especially when we have a whole different color palette on the top.
Yeah, I think it's really fantastic as well. The one thing that I saw immediately, like my eye went to the plus minus, and when I see that, I think of confidence intervals, not what it does represent. So I don't really have a suggestion on what a better symbol would be, but that's what I thought. That was my initial like reaction, that it would be confidence intervals of something. But
yeah, that's a great suggestion. And I totally agree that month over month count is not what I would think about either with a plus minus symbol like this. So maybe instead like a calendar symbol would make that more obvious, or even having the word month. And you can still select that if you use it as an icon. Thanks for that suggestion.
We see in the chat, what do the numbers represent? I don't see that labeled anywhere, listed anywhere. And maybe a delta symbol instead of the plus minus.
Yeah, delta symbol is a good suggestion too. The numbers represent passengership. So this is just the number of passengers flying on each of the airlines that month, according to the data source at the bottom, which I have called out at the bottom. And that's a really great point too. If I don't have I'm losing the word. If I don't have it spelled out anywhere that that's what this is, like passengership, then that's also a miss as the designer of this dashboard. It's a good call out.
I guess your title has passengership in it, but it's not. Yeah, it's not like that's across the top or something on the chart.
Exactly. It's like one of the words here, but it's not in the title, it's not in the subtitle, so it definitely could be.
I'll cut it for a couple of things. On one of these where you've got two things that are along the same timeline, I would squish the bottom chart so that, you know, January on top matches January on the bottom. I might even go so far as to literally put them exactly together so you only have the month label once, and it applies to both. The only time that would get into trouble if you have like a chart that's missing a month of data. There's an option in Tableau where you can check off to make sure that that stays, even though there's no value in that month. Airlines will always have passengers, which won't be a problem. But the green and red thing is like an accessibility nitpick. People who are colorblind, you could use like an orange and a blue or something that is more visual to folks looking at it. And I know you said you made this years ago, so you would have made those decisions already, but rounding the numbers on the bottom, you don't have to have down to the nearest penny in terms of passengership. All right, so
all great suggestions. Thank you.
That's an excellent job. I was just thinking of including the last update or the date range more. I don't know. Yeah, like when this data was last updated is always a good thing to have on your dashboard.
Definitely. And the date range, I agree with that too. Like I should have made it bigger to say like, we're looking at 2020, because now that it's been a couple years, you don't really know if this is the current year or what we're looking at.
So I think this is a feature that came out after you originally built the dashboard. And I haven't used it yet, but I think there's something, it's called like Tableau image roles or something like that, where you can assign values to specific images. So you could like get all of the different logos, for example. And I think that would just sort of add a bit to the dashboard and add some like recognizability to the brand. Because when I look at like big purple one, then I have to go down and look at the legend to find out, okay, that is Delta, right? Versus if it were the logo or the logo were next to the purple airplane, I might visually understand what it's trying to say about Delta in the moment.
Yes, I like that a lot. You definitely want to make it so you don't have to think about what is that. And a legend's really helpful, obviously, but like you're saying, you wouldn't know that purple means Delta. It's always a better idea for your user to understand things right off the bat, especially when understanding the logo is not the intent of your dashboard, right? You don't want them to spend time there. It's a really good suggestion.
We've got one more. I don't want to keep you from proceeding.
Okay.
Maybe we'll cut it here.
Sure.
So my first reaction was the colors are a lot, and it's very hard to really understand exactly what the top chart is saying and then what is the bottom chart as well. So my recommendation would be to take out the bottom and use a link so that if somebody wants to drill down a little bit more. When we look at the top one, because of all of the colors, it is very hard to really understand exactly what is going on. And what was said before is that you have to go from colors and then down to the legends and not necessarily put labels next to those particular lines if you can, but also it's hard to identify exactly what that chart is trying to say, right? We see the ranks, but maybe it's that particular line that needs to be called out and everything else needs to be into the back. That would be my feedback that I just learned recently.
That's such a good idea. And there's a really popular Tableau visionary named Chantilly, who that is like one of the biggest things is like use color very intentionally and keep it limited to like 2 or 3. I'm definitely breaking that rule here. And what we could have done, like you're saying, is make the lines grayed out and maybe have a selector where just one is highlighted in a different color to really draw your eye if that's the story that I'm telling. But at this moment, you don't know what story there is with that line chart. So thanks for that feedback.
All right, we got the link to the image roll feature in the chat for everyone to use, and we'll make sure everyone just holds the mic a bit closer when talking. Go ahead with the rest of what you got.
Okay. I thought that was so much fun, and I feel the same way when I'm doing this internally to my group. So something I'm going to bring up later is that you can host your own Makeover Monday with your own group of Tableau enthusiasts or maybe some analysts that do data visualizations on your own. There's data sources out there, and what really is impactful about this kind of discussion is that I'm getting feedback. You're telling me about some features that maybe I didn't think about, or ways that I could have done this differently, like the color highlighter. We've had some really good discussions in the 4 years that we've done Makeover Monday that have helped people go from beginner to intermediate to more advanced. So being together in community is a really good opportunity. And we do it every week, Makeover Monday. All right, and I'll tell you more about what resources are available later on in this presentation. Okay, so to that note, one of the things that you should set as your goal this year is to network with some more people. And in doing so, you can seek inspiration from others who are doing really amazing work, like Viz of the Day, Iron Viz, or Charter. Viz of the Day is on Tableau Public, where they choose someone's dashboard as like one of the better put together dashboards on their platform. And then a ton of viewers go and look at it and provide feedback as well. So if you're looking for some inspiration, Viz of the Day is always a good one. Iron Viz is the annual Tableau challenge for creating a dashboard within a certain rules, right? I think that they get the data source ahead of time, and then they can like make the best dashboard possible, or maybe I can't remember if they actually do it like on the fly within 45 minutes. It's been a while since I joined, but Iron Viz is a really exciting competition about some really impactful Tableau designers. And Charter sends out some charts about things that are relevant in the news. So they're not always the most like visually impactful, but they're always going to be relevant to what's going on in the world. So if that's more your speed, there's some really good charts happening in Charter. If you're looking for inspiration, of course, you can always join the Tableau conference. I think that's coming up soon this year as well. And Tableau Visionaries, which I've mentioned a couple times, are some of the people recognized as being the best out there for not only what they're doing with the software, but also how they're engaging with the community. A lot of them have their own blogs or are frequently responding to Tableau public topics or discussion forums. So if you're looking for some inspiration and you just want to go to some people doing really cool stuff, Tableau Visionaries are a really great place for inspiration. And connecting with others. So the group that I am a part of internally, the Comcast, was put together by some people who were just enthusiastic about data. We were all volunteering to come together and run things ourselves, and we still are 5 years later. So there are definitely people who are excited about Tableau and analyzing data that are out there. Even for ourselves, we have our Tableau group that I'm a part of, and I just found out that we also have an analytics group that's been doing something really similar to us, but with Power BI. So now we're thinking about how can we collaborate more with them. You can join a Tableau user group, and there's Tableau user groups for tons of different industries, products. It can also be geography based, or there's Data Plus Women for some representation. In fact, we're at a Tableau user group event right now. So thank you to the Northern New England Tableau user group for hosting this session. But it's a great way to get involved consistently with some people who either have a shared interest or shared geographic location, so you can connect with people. Okay, and lastly, I wanted to encourage us to build a portfolio. A portfolio can look a couple different ways, but I would suggest you could look into a Tableau resume. And I bring up Kimley Scott, a Tableau visionary herself, and the first one of Australia. She put together a Tableau resume that was a viz of the day, and it was so insanely cool. She has this portrait of herself made of 3,000 circles. And I'm just like, what? That's so cool. But the rest of this is her resume. So she has her about me, her skill sets, and you can change those to be relevant to whatever you're looking for. And she talks about her experience in this visually interesting way. So she has this circle of time where she talks about her different positions. And down here as well, the awards and recognitions. And if I click on these, I think some of them have links. Yeah, this one, for example, has a link to go see that recognition. As well as in the community, she's done some exciting things. So, for example, here she's highlighting the Flurlage twins, Iron Viz Reflections, where she wrote a blog post, and it's just represented in this interesting way with the little sparkles. So this is her resume, and when she applies to other jobs, she doesn't have, well, of course, she may need to put in a Word document format, but how impactful would it be to get this as your resume as well? And to that note, a Tableau public portfolio is something that you should submit along with your resume, because your portfolio is, if we think about ourselves as designers, if you think about an interior designer or like a fashion designer, they're always going to have a portfolio to say, like, obviously I can tell you that I do good work, but what you want to see is what it looks like. When we have a visual field, we need to incorporate a visual portfolio, and that is so easy to do with Tableau Public. And one of the things that I hear when I talk about making a Tableau Public portfolio is that we only want to post the best of our best if it's going to be in our portfolio. But I don't think that's true either. I think it's just as relevant to post a dashboard like the one that we just reviewed with Makeover Monday and show your progress, because we didn't all start out at the top, right? We want to show that we started at the beginning and we learned a lot of techniques, and we can talk about those in our interview. And where are we at today, right? So you don't just want to put your beginnings out there. You definitely want to keep it updated if that's the goal. But I think it's important to have both to show your learning journey. And in this same note, you can demonstrate your techniques, as we talked about at the beginning of this session with trying new techniques. You'll want to show that you can use those. And one of the ones that I think about for my own journey is that I learned how to make a calendar in Tableau, and I can't tell you the number of times that I've needed to do that in my dashboard since then. So that's something that I want to really highlight on my portfolio. I told you that I wouldn't leave you hanging with some free resources. I think one of the biggest struggles sometimes is I want to practice my Tableau skills, but I don't know where to start, and I don't have the resources to spend money for the right data, or I don't know where to look for some good data, because there's plenty of bad data out there, and you want to make sure you can trust the resource in, terms of cybersecurity as well. So let's start at the left side. Challenges, we just talked about Makeover Monday. Makeover Monday has been running for 8 years, and they have on their website an archive of all of the data sources they've used in 8 years of a weekly session. So you can go and use 8 years worth of data by using the Makeover Monday archive. I think this is the one that I frequently go back to for various reasons. not only can I go use their data source, which I already know has been vetted to be clean and secure, but because it was part of a Makeover Monday, there's going to be other people who have already used that data source and made a dashboard. So if I'm struggling to think about how I could visualize something, I can look up in the comments or on Tableau Public for that Makeover Monday week, and we're going to get all of the relevant dashboards that others have created and use that as inspiration for what I could do. We've also already talked about Workout Wednesday. So here's the link to that, another weekly challenge that is more focused on here's the skill that we're trying to build. Blogs and visionaries I've talked about a few times, but here are some really prominent names that you should totally have on your radar if you're starting to look around. Andy Kriebel was the founder of the Makeover Monday idea, and he has a series on YouTube called Watch Me Viz, where he himself is a Tableau expert, and he takes that data source that we're all using, and he makes a dashboard based on what he would do. And that some of the things that he does are mind-blowing. Other things, it's like, oh, like, of course, that's the way you would want to look at this. But there's so much knowledge in what he shares as he's going through and making a viz from scratch on his YouTube channel. So really, I've taken a lot of inspiration from Andy over the years. The Flurridge twins, I think, are some of the most prominent visionaries that are still making content about their Tableau recommendations, skills. They have blogs themselves, and they also do consultations, and I think probably have a cohort or two. So the Flurridge twins, I think, are just very active in the blog community. Gafar Shah is from my own company, and he has a blog where he shares some tips and tricks himself. And Tableau Visionaries there at the bottom, and that's the link to see who are the current visionaries. It does change every year, and links to all of their public profiles, so you can go look at the dashboards that the visionaries are creating. And free data sets. So I've told you that Makeover Monday has links to a bunch of free data sets, but also other places that we look is real world fake data. Real world fake data is some of the most robust business type dashboards, or I'm sorry, business type data sources that you can build a dashboard from. And they're focused to different industries. So for example, there's one in healthcare, there's one in the retail sector. We recently did one where it was like a ticketing system, because those are so prominent in tech today. So you can go use that data source and create a dashboard that is relevant to your industry, and use that to think about how you could use it in your day-to-day. Data World is the host of many of these free data sources. So not only do real world fake data and Makeover Monday make reference and host all of their data on Data World, but you can find more data sources than just from those authors. Kaggle is the same way. Kaggle is a trusted source. Data.gov, if you are more interested in things relevant to the public sector. And Data is Plural is another great collection of data sources out there. And just a fun note, since we are speaking at a university today, Tableau Desktop is free for full-time students. So if that's what's holding you back, just know that it is free for Tableau Desktop if you're a full-time student. All right, that's everything I wanted to go over. I hope that you take some time to be intentional about your goals this year in your professional life. And the way that we can make confident strides in our career is to be intentional about our goals. So I hope that using the resources I've gone over today, or using some of the ideas like Makeover Monday, so you can start to connect or drive your career in an intentional way. Here are the links if you want to stay connected with me on LinkedIn or Tableau Public. I'm also on this journey. I'm still building my portfolio myself, so happy to connect on those platforms.
Thank you, Olivia. That was great. Lots of stuff out there. It's hard to know what's the best of breed kind of to use as resources. Does anyone have any questions in the audience? We have a few minutes online as well. Thanks for shout out on the Makeover Monday. I don't know if the scope of Comcast is what kind of tripped us up. Like there's 120,000 people in that company, and of course all of them aren't in analytics, but getting that and knowing where all the little pockets of people throughout the organization were to band together. It was a slow burn at the beginning, but I'm happy you guys have built some momentum.
Mm-hmm.
I can't see the screen. The Makeover Monday dashboard we reviewed, ...
Yeah, so those are just the links to the two dashboards that we reviewed today during the session.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, if you're consistent with one of these programs, it's one of probably a dozen now. They have the Sports Sunday is another iteration of these types of online community challenges. And yeah, it's a great place to get free data that's structured in a way that's meant to go right into a dashboard. You don't have to fuss around with structuring it or manipulating, groping with it. You just get it right in there and then start building something. And the Watch Me Viz YouTube videos that Andy Kreibel does every week are like mind-blowing. He started his own, he's calling it the Data School, and they have campuses in New York and London and Germany now. I think they're going to expand further, but he's really become like one of the go-to, he's always been, but really now is solidified his place in the community as like the first stop you always check out. I was going to say too, the visionaries and everything online, connecting with like the people, you can follow all these people on Twitter and LinkedIn, and they'll post regularly. But if you have questions, I've reached out. One of the Flerlich twins was kind enough to join us at my previous company for a sort of tug data viz community of practice meeting as a remote speaker, and just was so generous with his time. If you have like, it has to be a serious question. You can't be asking him about like something you could Google, but if it's really you're stuck on a dashboard, these people in the community are fantastic and donating their time to helping people. We're a little bit over. Olivia, I know you might have to run, so we'll let you go. And thank you everyone for online for your patience. We'll be off for 10 minutes to let everyone here have a little bit of a break, yourselves as well, and then we'll be back in 10.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, welcome back online. Welcome back in house. We'll get started with our second presenter. Just going to turn this on for him. We're going to learn all about the benefits and pitfalls of bar charts with Michael Correll.
Yeah. Do we want to turn video on? Okay. All right, there's video. Okay. Perfect. Can you all hear me on Teams? Hopefully in the room as well. Perfect. Okay. So I'm Michael Correll. I worked at Tableau Research for 5 years, and I just started at the Rue Institute here in Portland, back in September. So I'm adjusting from industry research to more academic research. But one of the things that I studied is sort of how visualizations can go wrong, deceptive practices in visualization and things like that. And so this talk is kind of a grab bag of some of those findings that we had both at Tableau and here. And in particular, what I'm focusing on is bar charts, because I think pretty much everyone thinks they get bar charts, but the way that people conceptualize bar charts and the way that Tableau conceptualizes bar charts actually results in some problems. So I'm going to give you a little bit of historical context. So these are called Nilometers. And what happens is if you're in Egypt prior to the construction of the Aswan Dam, the Nile floods every season. If it floods too much, you have a problem because things are, flooded. But if it floods too little, you also have a problem because your crops aren't getting irrigated. And so how you'd measure this is you'd, dig a big, in this case, channel straight down, and you put these little marks on the side, and you'd literally see how far does the water go up those marks, and you'd make a note of it. And if it's too many marks up, then that's bad. If it's too few marks, that's bad too. Around the sort of middle of the 18th century, someone was like, hey, we could maybe turn this, experiential data into something more abstract. And so actually the first bar charts or things that look like bar charts that we can find in print are from the middle of the 18th century. So this is the River Seine, and it's essentially the same thing, right? It's marking these river markings and putting them in a chart like this. Right, you can even see it, and this one is sort of a little bit later. Everyone, that person down there has a bunch of like hydrometer tools and levels. But I want to point out, right, these are physical markings, right? There's actually a one-to-one correspondence between the y-axis here and something out in the real world, right? So you could say like 1 inch on the paper corresponds to 1 foot of the river, let's say. But if you search for what's the first bar chart in history, you often get something that come out about a few decades later. So this is William Playfair's example. It's often called the first bar chart. And here we've sort of lost this connection to a physical property. This is imports and exports of Scotland. And this doesn't correspond to something like feet of a river. It's an abstract quantity that has been, in this case, aggregated into account. And this produces kind of a conflict or a friction, right? So you have this bar chart, and it's categorical data of an aggregate value. That's what you think of it as. That's what Tableau thinks of it as, right? It's a green pill and a blue pill. But then you have this other way that people are taught about bar charts, which is as stacks of stuff, right? So Blake has the most apples, right? And there's some things kind of in the middle ground between these two extremes. So isotype visualizations are one example. This is one from the Soviet 5-year plan, showing how much coal they wanted to make as part of the 5-year plan, right? And it's stacks of physical stuff, but it's also kind of portrayed as an aggregate. And what I'm going to argue with this talk is that all of these properties that Tableau thinks are inherent to bar charts can create problems. And not just Tableau, by the way, a lot of ways that people envision bar charts. So, the easiest one to talk about is the notion of an aggregate. So an aggregate can kind of hide things, right? So here we said, oh, here's average of sales. And you might say, oh, Y is outselling X. But why is that, right? It could be either literally, these are sales data from the two things. We only have 1 point per bar. There could be a single outlier deriving this difference, right? There could be some data quality issues, missing data, different sampling sizes. So this one aggregate value could be hiding all of this stuff behind it, which might make the conclusion, Y is greater than X, more suspect. Right, so that's the most obvious thing that's kind of weird about bar charts, is this notion of an aggregate. But there's this also issue, which is there's this notion of length, right? I know what length means when I have the depth of a river or a stack of stuff, but the length of an aggregate gets kind of weird. So here's a chart I use in, I have a lecture on deceptive visualizations. It's a chart from a sort of UC Santa Barbara student newspaper. I'm showing sort of perceived drug use among your peers versus actual self-reported drug use for various drugs. Does anyone want to take a few seconds? And I can't see chat, so I'll rely on you all to help me know what's going on. What's going on in this one? Yeah. 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 So people are noticing that the scale of these charts seems kind of wacky, right? In particular, like 0 and 56 are the exact same height. If you look at this, what actually happened is the graphic designer just copied the graphic, but forgot to adjust the heights of the bars. Right, so it's the same bar for every single panel, but you see those numbers, right? And you're like, okay, does that trend really match up? So here's, if you were to actually plot in Tableau, it's a totally different picture of the data. But that was kind of difficult, right? Like, it shouldn't be that difficult to say, oh, this is just the same image repeated 9 times. But we see this length and make an interpretation of it. Yeah, I would argue it's. Yeah, the argument is this bar chart. I'd say no, it's really more number decoration than actually encoding value, right? But there's this break of the encoding. So there's a related issue. I think, raise your hand if you've seen this chart before. Okay, if you like half the room, right? If you search for like bad visualization, misleading visualization, this is like almost inevitably comes up, and it's always exactly this image, which is why it's so low resolution. Is someone took a picture of their local Fox affiliate with their cell phone camera back in like 2012, and everyone's been using it ever since. But it has an issue. So for those who haven't seen it, can you identify what the issue is with this bar chart? Yeah, that was the answer I was looking for. It starts at 34%, and that's kind of weird, right? So it's a difference between 35 to 39.6, but it looks super, super big. In fact, the bar on the right is 5 times larger than the bar on the left. And so Edward Tufte says that this is a violation of something called the lie factor, which is what you want the size of the graphic to be correspondent to the size of the effect of the data, right? So his example here is this like shrinking doctor. It's actually sort of the height of the doctor encodes data correctly, but we see area rather than length for these things, and so you get this lie factor of 2.8, because it's an increase from 12 to 27%, but the doctor is actually like 4 times bigger on the left than the right. Right, and so you can do the same math for the Fox News chart, right? 400% increase in size, but it's only sort of a roughly 13% relative increase year over year, and so it's a lie factor of 30, and that's awful. So you can see it, for how absurd this is for graphs like this, right? So the poor woman from India is something like 1/60th of the size of the poor woman from Latvia, right? And so what you get is never, ever, ever start your bar charts from anything other than 0, because then you get this sort of disconnect between the encoding of length and the actual change in the data. So if you show something like this, starting from 0, that change looks less dramatic. But so this was a chart that was published by the National Review. It's called "The Only Climate Change Chart You Ever Need," and it kind of like, like if you're on a long road trip with your kids and they're like, "You can't be mad, I'm not touching you." Like they're technically following the rules, but still like trying to get on your case. Like this one, hey, the y-axis starts from 0. What are you guys complaining about? So this is real data, but it compresses all of the action in this really small area, and I'd argue it's a bad chart because of that. For the main reason that, like if global average temperature is 0 degrees Fahrenheit, we're in deep trouble, right? Like we're talking about impacts of 1 or 2 or 3 degrees Celsius. So you can't really see that on this chart, which suggests that the data changes you care about aren't visible. And so I'd argue you'd actually maybe want to show it like this. Okay, so starting from 55. Okay, but isn't this a violation of the lie factor, right? Like it's exaggerating the data. So we actually looked to see sort of what people have thought about this, and there's almost a century of ink spilled on this question of whether it's okay to start a y-axis from 0 or not, whether it exaggerates the data or not. There's sort of 3 groups that we found. So one of these anathemists, which is you should never do it, it exaggerates the data, it's bad, don't do it. There's this one, it's like the line chart exceptionalists, which is, okay, for bar charts it's bad, but specifically line charts, you're looking at trend and relative change, so it's actually okay to mess around with the y-axis there. And then this third group, sort of most interesting, these signalers, which is, yes, it's bad to do it, but sometimes you have to, and you should actually, tell people that you've done it. So here it's Brignall saying that you should do this like torn paper metaphor on the bottom that shows, hey, there's more y-axis. I just chopped it off so you can see what's going on. One thing that all of these have in common is that nobody actually tested any of these. They just said them, which I highly recommend. It's a good gig. So what we did is actually try to test some of these methods of signaling or otherwise messing around with the bar charts to say, hey, there's more stuff going on. All of these are ones we actually found in the literature, by the way, including this like high noon standoff one, G, which is interesting. Right, and so we just literally like gave people the same data, just asked them really simple questions like, how big a deal is this change? We tried different wordings. We didn't use exactly that one, but that's roughly what we did, right? It's just 1 to 5, like, hey, what's this trend look like? And what we found is everything is bad and nothing helps. So everything is bad. So these little panels here, it's the exact same data. All we did is just change where the y-axis starts, and things get perceived as more and more severe as you mess with that y-axis. Okay, so chopping things off does exaggerate the visual effect, and that results in some perception of a larger effect. But the nothing helps is that none of these designs that we tried, they essentially all performed roughly the same. So whether it was a bar or a line, you still got the same increase. So the question is, okay, then what do I do as a designer? And for me, I think what's important is context. And so this like big change in tax rate, maybe, if you have $1 billion, a minute change in tax rate is actually a lot of money. But if you look at this one, okay, like the tax rate was way, way higher in the past, then it was down, and this, expiration of some taxes is maybe not that big a deal. So you gotta argue whether or not it exaggerates or not, without this context, it's hard to make a choice. Right, so that's one issue, is this length issue. I'm gonna talk more about aggregates now in this one. Right, so we already mentioned that they hide things, but they also sort of hide related aggregates. So this is a totally artificial example, but I was born in Atlanta, so I was told to be a Braves fan. So, but here we have David Justice, who played for the Braves, and we have Derek Jeter, who played for the Yankees. And you might ask, who was a better player in the 90s, let's say, when I was mostly doing these things? And that's a simple question we can ask. All right, let's look at their batting average in the mid-90s. And it looks like this. Okay, so Derek Jeter had a higher batting average, so he must have hit better. But this is 2 seasons worth of data. It's only 2 seasons in the 90s, so we can actually split it out, throw another pill on there, and then we get this pattern. So where every single year, David Justice out-hit Derek Jeter, but in aggregate, Jeter outperformed. So what's going on with this one? I won't make you guess, it's fine. The issue is, of course, that these are aggregates based on different sample sizes. So in particular, what's going on here is that David Justice had a worse year in 1995 than he did in 96, as did Derek Jeter, but David Justice also hit way more. He had way more at bats, right? So it was a poor year for both of them, but David Justice is overrepresented in that data set. So when you look at the aggregates overall, that's how you get this switch between the two. It maybe makes, so this is called Simpson's paradox. There's lots of examples with things like university admissions and things like that, but I do want to point this out as an example of how you have one aggregate sort of fails silently to tell you something that's important about the data. All right, second to last one, I guess, is this notion of categories. Right, so it's not a pile of things, it's data that's been aggregated and subset into categories. So here the data set I have is exit polls from the 2016 election. So I want you to put in the mindset that like you're a Democratic strategist, you're trying to figure out, all right, who do we need to reach out to more for the next election? So this is everybody in the US, and you say, okay, more people reported voting for Clinton than Trump. Okay, we knew that. Not too insightful. Let's start looking at things like race. Okay, so now I've gone to women voters, and we see sort of a bigger gap. So okay, so maybe women are voting for Clinton at a higher rate. That's interesting. Maybe we can do something about that. Now I'm going to facet by race. So here I have African-American women voters voted for Clinton, overwhelming majority. Like, okay, that's really, really interesting. That's maybe a group we should focus on. Right, so that's the path to this insight is, imagine all I did is just dropped 2 pills in and get to this result, or drop 2 filters in and get to this result. But now I'm going to take you through a different path through this data. So here I have all voters. I'm going to do race first now. And now we go, whoa, African-American voters voted for Clinton in this overwhelming thing. So maybe that's the group we need to focus on. And then when I facet by just the women of that subset, you're like, okay, it's slightly more biased towards women in this thing, but it's still sort of in the ballpark, like this really high 80s and 90s. So I suggest that's an issue because the path you take through the data determines when you get the insight. And that's just purely because of the order of the categories. So this is often called the drill down bias, right? So the way that you go through this data determines what you think the causative factor is. And so you have these like paths not taken that might introduce things. So we have to sort of think about different paths to the same insight, and the bar doesn't tell us that because it's the categories represented in the bar aren't transparently represented. Last one is histograms. So fun fact about histograms in Tableau, most of the code for histograms came from the recently departed Lee Wilkinson, sort of a foundation person in statistical graphics. But he would argue that these are not histograms that you see in prep. And that's because he believes that histograms are a piecewise linear estimator of a probability distribution. And so by including these little white spaces between the bars, you have made it just a bar chart of frequency, not a histogram. He was very insistent on that. So that's actually, if you make a histogram and show me, you'll notice the bars are right next to each other. But if you bin first and then use that to make a regular bar chart that actually is slightly visually different, that's Lee Wilkinson's impact on the product. Right, but the idea is that you see histograms, especially in things like prep, but also in Tableau Desktop, as sort of like a sanity check, right? Like you look at your data and say, oh, like there's a bunch of nulls, that's kind of interesting. This data is normally distributed, but this one's really heavily skewed. So there's supposed to be this like sanity check that lets you know what's going on. We tried to formalize this like sanity check process a little bit with something called algebraic visualization. I won't go too in depth into it, but the general idea is that you have representations of data that you do stuff to, and you have visualizations that you do stuff to, and you want stuff to commute, right? So if I make a big change to the data, there should be a big change in the visualization. I'll give you maybe 2 examples. So here I have 2 scatter plots. On the left, it looks like we have sort of this big central orange thing with some blue dots as outliers. On the right, we have blue dots and then some orange dots as outliers. What's going on here is that these are the exact same data. All I did is change the order that I drew the dots, and one overplots the other. Right. So the argument is that this is called something a hallucinator, because we see this big visual difference between plots, but there's no underlying difference in the data. So that's an algebraic visualization. The other one, example that's relevant here is, here I have two slope graphs across 3 dimensions. They look exactly the same, but on the left, I have a negative correlation between x1 and x3. On the right, I have a positive correlation. Right, so it's actually totally opposite relationship between variables, but it's totally invisible in the chart just because, right, there's that little thing in the center that pushes everything together. Right, so this is called a confuser because it's the exact same visualization that's hiding a data difference. So those are the 2 categories, right? Different visualization, but the data is really the same. Same visualization, but the data is really different. And I argue these happen with histograms all the time, right? So here I have 2 histograms. They look very similar. Like you might say, oh, like that second column from the left is like slightly taller on the left than the right. But they're actually different data. In particular, the exact same data, but on the right, I just repeated a value like 100 times, right? That's something you would hope you'd be able to see. But because sort of histograms normalize their height in the same area, like you don't see those minute differences in this spike there, right? So I'd argue that this is a confuser because you really want these 2 things to be visually different because the underlying data are visually different, but they aren't. But then there's this other issue, right? So here are 2 histograms that look very different. Like the one on the left looks like it has some outliers, like it looks like it's a little bit more uniform maybe, but they're both just like random samples from a Gaussian, like so the same source of data, but just, you know, there's, because there's so many bins, these like little minute differences that are really just sampling issues show up as visually different, right? So if you reduce the number of bins, then they both look more alike. Right, and so often when people talk about histograms, they talk about this sort of Goldilocks problem of setting the right number of bins, right? If there's too few, all your data look the same. If there's too many, all your data look different. You want something kind of in the middle. Given how crucially important this is to actually seeing patterns in your data, Tableau makes it kind of difficult, right? So you make a histogram, then you have to go into the binning and mess around with it. It suggests the bin size based on Lee's sort of formula. But you don't interactively get to see what's going on. You have to hit it and then hit this button. And as a result, like nobody does. This statistic is somewhat out of date, but the last time we crawled through Tableau Public, only something like 2% of sheets that had custom bins messed around with this value at all. Right? You just, you wouldn't know to go in and care about it. And that's a problem because if you give me control over the size of your bins, I can hide whatever I want, right? So here I have some data that I've messed with. Again, I've added a bunch of repeated values. And all of these visualizations of the distribution, you can tell what's going on. But if you let me control the design parameters of your visualization, I can hide it. Right? So it looks exactly the same between these 2, or almost exactly. Right? And so the question is, okay, well, what do you do to stop that? So one thing we tried is sort of a defense in depth strategy, which is, okay, if the bars aren't giving you enough, you need something else. I really like this name, rain cloud plots. But the idea is that you show a histogram on top, sure, but then you put a little bit of sort of, in this case, like a confidence interval showing more of that aggregate information. But then you still want to get people to see the interior values, so you also show raw data as well. This is just one design. We actually found like over 200 designs that people have proposed for these things. But the general idea is, yeah, it's sort of defense in depth. Like if the bar is not giving you something, you rely on something else that stops you from being confused in the same way that you might be with other algebraic visualizations. Okay. So that was my whirlwind tour through how bar charts can mislead you. I think the fundamental issue here is that we have 2 bar charts that live in our head that might be the same thing. So the first is like stacks of stuff. And we expect stacks of stuff to behave a certain way. Like, a taller stack corresponds to a larger value, right? We can see what's inside of it because it's just a stack of things versus these aggregates, which hide a bunch of stuff, right? And in particular, they can fail silently, right? Like if I didn't do digging and show you some of these examples, you might not have noticed these issues initially or even at all. And so what I think maybe the takeaway here is not that bar charts are bad, because that would be a silly position to take. But if something as simple as a bar chart can mislead you in this way, imagine what your other visualizations are doing. And so I guess the takeaway for designers here is, if you see an aggregate and it clears and it seems to show a trend, you're not done. You actually need to investigate what's going on internally in that data. You need to start digging down into those details. And then at the end, then you can build back up and show your audience the aggregate once you trust it. And that's all I had, so.
Thank you, Michael. Do we have any questions in the group, in the teams or here in the room? I have one just to start the pylon. When you're stacking stuff, as you said, would you recommend stratifying it? I know in Tableau you can actually, like, if you wave your mouse over the bar, you'll see individual slices stratified throughout the overall bar that would give you an idea that those are discrete things that are stacked on top of each other, but that can get really distracting and confusing too.
This is a very unpopular opinion, but I actually don't like stacked bar charts very much, because like one of the things that makes bar charts so good is that it's like length on a common axis. Like I can say, oh, that bar is like twice the size of that one. But when things are stacked, they're not on a common axis anymore. So at that point, you might as well just use a pie chart, right? Like it's roughly the same visual estimate you're doing, is this like visual ink between those two things. So I think stacked bar charts don't totally solve the problem. But I do think I think the insight of, if you want people to trust the aggregate number you give them some tool to dig deeper is well taken.
A huge fan of those like ancillary histograms that you add for, like, especially months and days, if you can break it out and show stuff on the sides of the axes. That's really cool.
Yeah, marginal histograms are cool. There's also like there's like strip plots and rug plots where you have a mark for each data point with some opacity on the margins, and then you put the histograms on top, kind of like the rain cloud plots I show, and then then you really know, like, oh, okay, these are the things that are connected between those two. So,
really good talk. That was really great. When you first started talking about bar charts in Tableau, I kept picturing the include zero tick button. It's like the most tortured part of my like development process, because when I'm looking at something and the difference isn't jumping out at me, and I think about, like, should I just not include zero? I was hoping, like, do you have a rule of thumb about that? I realize it's a little bit too complex maybe for a rule of thumb, but what do you think about that? And is that something you think a lot about, like, in your like development process?
yeah, so like one of the that whole include zero checkbox, Excel has the opposite problem, where it defaults to the range of the data for the bars. I prefer that zero default, right? Like most times when you want a bar chart, you expect people to be comparing the lengths, and so you want that zero in there. But if there's action happening in a small region, so one would be don't make a bar, make it a dot instead. One would be, I like this, so F here on my slide, sort of this like interactive focus plus context. They called it a quasi mode. And it's almost like, imagine like peeking behind a door. Like you hold down the button and then it zooms in on the y-axis region you care about. You release the button, it goes back to normal. And the idea, it gives you sort of the context of, like, here's how this change actually matters, but also the focus if you want it. You can do it in Tableau. It's a little bit iffier, but it's actually, you just do a calc and then it animates but yeah, I kind of like that. It's like you give the user some control about whether they want to do that, with the context that, hey, what you're doing is kind of a weird thing. I generally think that's how software should behave, is that you should let the user do something weird, but you should tell them they're doing something weird. But in general, right, I think the zero default is fine. Sometimes it isn't, and then you need to do a little bit of design work, but I think it's worth it for the designer to do that thinking rather than force the user to do that thinking every time they open it.
Yeah, because you could use like calc to even the thing you were talking about with the bins? Like, couldn't you throw that on and let people choose a custom bin in a parameter?
Yes, so you can like make a parameter that's the bin size. It doesn't animate particularly smoothly because it rebins and redoes those things. I wish it animated better. I actually haven't tried in the past couple years, so the animation's got a little bit better since then. But yeah, you can do that, but it doesn't quite operate as nice as you would expect. But we did do an internal white paper for Tableau, which I think we published. Yes, we published it, looking at using essentially just cribbing from everybody else on public. Like, for instance, age, right? You don't actually want, oh, I want a midpoint between the Friedman-Diaconis rule for binning and Sturgis's rule. No, you like actually, you wanted specific default years. And so it's actually looking, how did other people bin this particular category or particular quantitative field? Let's borrow that binning. If we can't find one, then we'll try to make one that's nice.
For bar charts hiding data in aggregates, isn't that really more of the aggregates fault rather than the bar chart's fault?
Yeah.
Okay. Just want to clarify that it's not the bar chart's fault, right? Median would have told a different story than average in all those 4 cases that you had shown there, for example.
It's the bar charts. Okay, so you would have some of these issues with other visualizations. I think the bar chart makes those problems worse because we have an expectation of how we expect differences in heights of bars to operate in a way that maybe we don't for like differences in overlaps of confidence intervals or something, right? I think our intuitions aren't as solid for some of those other visual forms, so when they don't behave like we expect, we're more okay with it. And that's a claim. That's not a.
Second question, could you reword your sort of like rule of 0 to rule of lowest reasonable reference point?
Yeah, that's actually, Tufte, I think, actually makes a similar rephrasing, which is like, if you have a meaningful 0, use a meaningful 0. And if you don't, do things like the range or the effect size. So right, in particular, like when I show this chart, I would say usually about 1/3 of the time I get the, haha, you started at 0 Fahrenheit, why didn't you start at 0 Kelvin? Right? Isn't that the natural 0 point for temperature? And there was no, right? Like there's a range of temperature we care about. And it's not 0 Fahrenheit and it's certainly not 0 Kelvin. So there are meaningful 0 points or meaningful baselines that are not 0.
Get over it. We have a question on the chat. Can you talk a little bit about some of the academic conferences on visualization research that may be of interest to practitioners? I found it useful to read the research and see talks of IEE.
IEEE Viz, yeah.
IEEE Viz.
Yeah. So yeah, IEEE Viz is sort of the big visualization academic conference. They usually have proceedings where they put little stars for like, we think practitioners are interested in this. So I find that useful. Tableau conference is also sometimes lets academics speak at it. I've spoken at it a couple times. ACM Chi is another one that has, or SIG Chi, CHI, has also visualization work there pretty regularly. There it's a little bit harder to sort of find the stuff you're interested in as a practitioner, just because it's so much bigger. Like I think they accepted over 1,000 papers this year, right? But you can look for visualization work there. But I think IEEE Viz does a good job of making practitioner stuff more relevant there. They have workshops, specifically things like Viz in practice that are meant to be hybrid between academic and practitioners. And so that's useful. There's also related ones. There's like Euroviz, which is the European version of IEEE Viz, and things like that. Yeah, so there are conferences. Some of them make it easier for practitioners than others, but Viz is a good one. I tend to write, so I have how shameless is this plug? Probably pretty shameless. I have a blog where I try to write recaps of some of these conferences, usually Euroviz, Chi, or Viz, and like what I found interesting there. So that's someone else sorting through some of those papers.
I had a baseball question. When you were talking about David Justice versus Derek Jeter, and you were talking about maybe this isn't fair because David Justice had a lot more at-bats, and you're kind of trying to crack it as a visualization problem. is it a problem with the metric? Like, is there a better metric for this? Like hits per at bat or hits per 1,000 at bats or something like that? Is that another way to crack it?
Yeah, I mean, so you know, I'm not a big Moneyball guy, so you're gonna have to go to someone else for that. But yeah, I mean, you know, batting average. If you were the manager of a team and you just look at batting average to choose your players, people would think you would nuts, just because, right? It's, you know, it's an informative metric, but it's not necessarily the informative metric, right? Like the question, who is a better baseball player, is not well posed in this slide, and it's certainly not well answered by looking at just their batting average. But certainly, it's counterintuitive that this metric doesn't behave like we would expect.
Be weird to weight an average, like if you had to multiplier.
Yeah, well,
effect.
I mean, like, you know, like, was it performance above replacement, right?
Yeah, wins above replacement.
wins
That's,
above,
that,
yeah.
yeah, there are like cumulative statistics that measure a person's like overall season better. Even better, there are ones better than WAR too, but yeah.
I feel like in this one in particular, you still have a little bit of design space to work with. There's not a ton with a bar chart, but like, for example, you could potentially vary the width of the bars to designate how many times were they up to bat, just to give sort of like the extra emphasis of like their batting average is comparable, but look how much more times at bat, for example. So you can represent a second metric in a different part of the visual space.
Yeah, in particular, there's been a lot of work on doing exactly that for box plots. So there's like notched box plots and wedged. There's a whole paper in different box plot variations, where, yeah, you, like, for instance, scale the interior of the glyph to show the sample size and things like that, which are nice. There are even these things like summary box plots where you just throw every single statistic simultaneously on top of it. Like there's a glyph for like skew and kurtosis and, you know, all of these like higher level statistical normal modes that nobody really understands, but you just throw them in the glyph anyway. And then, like, if there's a difference in those distributions, you're going to see it. Yeah, but I think there's more design space here. I mean, that's kind of the point of this talk, right? Is a bar chart gives you one number, and sometimes one number is not sufficient for your analytical question, right? And so if you need more numbers, well, there's ways of visualizing multiple numbers. Yeah, you could use circles. You can use you know, these notched box plots and all sorts of other things.
All right, that brings us to about 5 minutes to the top. Thank you again, Michael, for this. I know you're under a deadline in your real job, so I appreciate you participating and giving a good talk. Thank you again. And then we're going to have my co-host Agata speak to wind us up.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So I'm Agata Kederick, one of the co-leads of our new TUG. Thank you all for coming out, by the way. And so these are just some upcoming events in the Tableau community. Got Chart Chat coming up this later today. Boy. They're always fun to watch. Where does data viz fit into an AI-driven world on February 1st, right here. And then the higher education TUG on February 13th. And the Portland Tech Meetup, do we not have a date for that? Yeah, coming up. But yeah, so thank you all so much for coming out. We really appreciate it. And, you know, we definitely can always use help putting these on. So if you have ideas for speakers or if you'd like to volunteer to speak, please let Patrick or myself know. And we do plan on having these once a quarter. So we don't have the April one scheduled yet, but we are planning on having an April event as well. Thanks so much.